Welcome to Out of Rotation, volleyball talk for players, coaches, and fans. Presented by the American Volleyball Network. Here's your host, University of Louisville Associate Head Coach Dan Meske.
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. My guest today, University of Marquette head volleyball coach Ryan Theis. Coming off of an amazing 2022 season where they went 29-4, 18-0 at home, undefeated, and went to a Sweet 16. Ryan has had one heck of a volleyball coaching career, and he has had to grind to get jobs, to move up, to get his first head coaching job. He was an assistant coach at Florida before getting his first head coaching job at Ohio, and then he's been the head coach at Marquette for a number of years and had really, really impressive success there. I got to know Ryan on the recruiting trail. I can't even remember when, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15. But what I think about when I think about Ryan is my conversations with him are always very real. He's just a very real and very humble guy. And that's part of the reason I started this podcast. I was having these fantastic conversations with people, and I just thought, man, I wish I would have known that 10 years ago. So this podcast is in particular for maybe up-and-coming coaches, maybe players that are thinking about making the transition into coaching. Ryan is just one of those people that will shoot you straight. He's got a lot of good dad jokes along the way. And I hope you enjoy our conversation in part one, where we go over his journey in coaching and how he got himself in a position to be coaching one of the top programs in the country at Marquette. Here it is, part one, Ryan Theis.
And my junior year is when I found out you could actually be a volleyball coach for a living. A friend of mine, Jeff Dow, was like, hey, I'm going to go be a GA. And I was like, what's that? And so I said, well, I want to do that. So at the end of my junior year, I went into the women's coach, Kathy Litzow, who's now the SWA at Milwaukee. Her daughters have played volleyball. And I just said, I think I want to get into coaching. And she said, what do you want to do? And I said, I'll do whatever you want. So I came every day, went on every trip and did everything and started coaching women right after that.
So what did she give you as far as, say I'm in college right now or I'm a young aspiring coach? Like what was her advice for you as somebody that, hey, you want to coach women's volleyball and you're playing on a men's club team right now? What did she say? How the heck do you crack into that?
Yeah. I didn't even know questions to ask. I mean, I was totally oblivious, and so she said, like, what do you want to do? I just said, well, everything. And, she's like, be at all the practices. Yeah. And she'd travel. I was like, yeah. And so I was like bringing men's club team practice players. She'd be like, ooh, give me that guy. He was good. I want him to imitate this person. So I'm managing the club team. I'm player coach. I'm doing practices from 10 to midnight on the men's side. That was our gym slot after they cut men's volleyball. And then, I said, how do we plan practice? How does that work? And so I came into the office. They said, we'll come in, an hour before tomorrow. And she talked to Susie about, what we were going to work on. She was 9 months pregnant too at the time when the preseason went. She actually had the baby during preseason, and there was a part-time second assistant as well. And so I was just doing whatever I was told. And then, at the end of it, it was, I don't like looking on AVCA for jobs and sending a terrible resume.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, then you hop around to Northwestern, Indiana, Eastern Illinois. What's the hardest job to get, or what's the biggest challenge? Because I feel like a lot of coaches find themselves in that grind. I mean, what's the challenges in that grind area as a coach when you're just trying to get your foot in the door?
I think why I made it is like I took a job that no one wanted. Like I think when I went to Eastern Illinois, it was $15,000, and it was the head coach's first time. She had come from a JUCO. It was in Charleston, Illinois, which is a wonderful place to go to college. It's not a super fun place to be 22 years old and not supposed to be doing college things. So there was like two applicants, and I asked, I didn't even have my degree. I applied and I was like, if I get the job, I have to be a volunteer this summer and take a 12-credit internship. I'm like, you don't have your degree, you have your spring degree. And I was like, well, I'm done with all my classes, but I need the summer to be an internship. And they're like, who the hell is this guy? So I go on the interview, and the only reason I got the job is there was a question on like, what happens if a player skips weights? And I guess the other candidate said, this is Brenda Winkler, the head coach. She tells the story. The other guy said, what's just not acceptable. You can't do that. There's no way it should be in the program. And I said, well, I assume we have something in our team book or some plan or policy in place that we would have a reasonable consequence, so that it meets an expectation. And she said that was basically the difference in the two of us, because neither of us had any qualifications for $15,000, is that I was like, well, there should be a plan, right? We should have a plan in place. And so that was tough. I was applying for GA ships and sending resumes and just not even a single response. I didn't get a response at all.
Is that something where you feel like your network's not big enough? Or, I mean, again, now this is before the world is so connected with email and all that, but when you kind of feel, I know that feeling of you feel like you're in a little bit of a silo and you just can't get that connection. Did you feel like you just didn't have a big enough network yet, or why weren't you getting any responses? And but what got you out of that feeling? Because I know I talk to coaches a lot that feel like, man, how can I just establish that connection? And again, that's the hardest jump to make. What did you feel like did that for you to start getting some responses back?
Well, again, it was the only one I got, but I think it was just my willingness to slave away for nothing at Milwaukee and do everything to help the women's program, an extremely respected program. Kathy and Susie over the last 25 years have done really great things. And they said, he's great. He'll do whatever. He'll work hard. And so they had a connection. Yeah. Kathy and Susie knew Brenda from Illinois camp, oddly enough, because Brenda was Champaign area and Kathy had, I think, done a GA ship with Don Harden at Illinois. And so there was a friend of a friend, right? Yeah. And I worked really hard for the one friend and they helped get me a job, which is one of the reasons I think I've been so passionate about being an AVCA like mentor mentee and helping young people come in. And because really it's about getting that break. And then
well, real quick, as we're still on that, there's one thing I want to ask too, and I don't know if we'll get to it. So again, just putting myself in an assistant coach's position, how do you navigate now in that position? You're talking about you're making $15,000 a year. Obviously the head coach sees that as an entry job. I know a lot of coaches too that are in a position where they do kind of want to move up a little bit, but they also have a pretty good job, especially in their head coach's eyes, where they're in that assistant coach phase of, how do I include my head coach I want them to go to bat for me because I would like to potentially move up for whatever it might be, whether it's money or they feel like it's a higher level. But I feel like that's and for you as a head coach, I think it's a really good perspective. Like, how do assistant coaches balance that with their head coach of, you don't want to offend them in the fact of like, hey, I really want to look for some opportunities and I want you to help me with that, but I also love where I'm at. I know a lot of coaches that feel kind of in that mindset of, how do I balance that with my head coach? How have you done that throughout your career? Or how have you seen assistants with you, maybe even that you've understood where they're coming from and you can support them?
I actually used to call around and ask other assistants that were friends of mine. So, you talked about your network. Well, the first thing I did when I got to Eastern Illinois is I started meeting other assistants in the conference, other head coaches in the conference, and just trying to create some friendships. A couple of people who I'd played against were now into college coaching. And so I'd call them and see them recruiting or ask if they would go room with me. And, some of them with a little more experience than me, some of them with similar experiences to me. And, Dave Booz gave me a good comment one time. I think when I was either at Indiana or Northwestern, I think maybe Indiana. And it was, hey, I'm talking about this job with the head coach and I'm doing this. And he said, if this one doesn't work, you better bag it for a year. You can't go to your head coach every 3 weeks and tell him about a job that you think is better, right? Him or her. So I would say choose wisely to those people in terms of what you think you have shots at. Do a little bit of legwork in advance. RJ, my old assistant, was great about some head coach and assistant jobs. And I would pick up the phone for him and I'd call and go, hey, do you know who you're hiring? I've got a guy who's pretty good. And if they had somebody who's hiring, it got dropped. He didn't keep coming back to me with that job 5 more times. Like, are you trying to leave? So it's definitely a fine line of, I'm happy, but I say, communicate transparently. A lot of times I'm asking my assistants, like, is this something you're interested in?
Yeah.
Hey, this job is open. I'll help in any way. Like, I used to have to make Megan Keck talk to schools about being a head coach. And she'd be like, I don't think I want to be a head coach. I was like, you have to talk to this AD. Yeah. And that rarely went well with her.
You were almost driving the boat for her. So, well, like you said, let's roll right into those Indiana years. So the Eastern Illinois to Indiana jump is probably that one we're talking about, where then you're in the Big Ten, you go Indiana to Northwestern. So take me through a little bit of that phase in your coaching career.
So I thought when I was at Eastern Illinois, hey, I really want to go to a higher level program and be a second assistant and learn. And at Eastern Illinois, it's not that I wasn't learning, I was. It's, Brenda and I, got along great, and she would rely on me on a lot of volleyball stuff. I did a lot of scouting, or just as a player, she had come from the JUCO ranks, like, here's how serve and pass worked at UW Milwaukee, or here's something we did at Milwaukee. And that was great, but I wanted to see how some higher level programs were doing it. And again, I think the reason I was able to make that huge jump from Eastern Illinois to a Big Ten school is there's a couple reasons. One, I knew the assistant that left, Dave Booz, and he put in a good word for me and was an extremely hard worker for Katie Weissmiller, the head coach.
And that's something you were talking about, that you and Dave, maybe like you connected with him recruiting, and that's where that relationship started.
Yep. He played at a club at Oshkosh.
Okay.
And so when I was doing the club, he was a couple years older and ran a really good Oshkosh men's club team. And he got into coaching kind of just before me, maybe 2 years before me. And so I kept that relationship and still have it. And so he's like, hey, this guy's comes from my background, Wisconsin club guy, ran his team, works really hard. And there's two other reasons I think I was able to get it. One is extremely late. I had actually gotten offered Northern Arizona assistant job like the same week that job opened. And I actually got a U-Haul for, I want to say, like August 6th. And I had it booked for either Flagstaff, Arizona, or Bloomington, Indiana. And I told her that on the interview. I said, it's like August 3rd and season starts. I got to be there.
Yeah, you're talking really late. When you said August 6th, I was like, I thought when you talked late, like July or June even. I mean, August, that's insanely late.
I think I got there a day before season started. And then at the time, there was scuttlebutt about whether Katie was safe. Now, she went on to coach, I think, 6-7 more years at Indiana, but it was a tough job in terms of job stability, and it was really late, and I was 23 years old, and hey, I'll go work in the Big Ten. And so I'd called some older coaching friends that I had met over the last 2 to 3 years, even some head coaches. I remember Joylene Tracy, I called her. She's now the SWA at Wright State. She was the Wright State head coach at the time, and just said, hey, I'm weighing between these two jobs. And she said, if you want to be a head coach in the Midwest, go to the Big Ten.
Well, and like you said, 23 years old, that U-Haul probably wasn't very big either. It was a pretty quick trip.
I had like a bad, crappy golf clubs. An old couch that was in my parents' basement. It was rough.
Nice.
So I showed up there, and the first season went really well, and I thought it was because of me. I'm like, man, I have really helped here. And I learned so much as my career got on that it had absolutely almost 0% to do with me. And then the next year we weren't as good. And I was like, oh man, it must be the head coach.
Yeah, it wasn't you anymore.
Yeah. So, and then in the Big Ten, I did the same thing. I jumped on, I think, the assistant coaches committee, met a lot of, like Sean Burdett was at Ohio State at the time, and Dave was at Minnesota, and there's still a lot of people that were assistants in the league. Ann Cordes was at Illinois at the time, and so I got to know all those people. And Northwestern, the old assistant was my college roommate's fiance. So she's like, "Hey, Ryan's doing great stuff in it." So then they hired Jen, who I didn't know, who's now my wife. She's the other assistant at Northwestern. And so her and Keeler kind of recruit me away from Indiana to Northwestern. And there I am, a recruiting coordinator at 25 in the Big Ten. And in our second year at Northwestern, we break some records. So again, it's because I'm super good at my job,
there
right?
You go. Yeah.
But again, continued to learn that no, it's really not because of me. There's just certain things that line up at certain times. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely, from 23 to 27 years old, was in the Big Ten as an assistant. The money then wasn't anything like it is now, but I learned a lot. I studied a lot of volleyball. I asked a million questions. I still ask a ton of questions. How are you doing this? Hey, I'm seeing this on video. What are you doing? And a lot of coaches will be really transparent with that stuff when you start talking about training. And that's when I kind of found my true passion of learning, high level volleyball and how teams are doing and what they're doing it. That's why
I'm doing this podcast too, is it's really cool when you connect with people people just want to help each other. And in kind of explaining what we did or how we're doing it, we have to kind of start defending it and wait, do I actually really think that that's the way that it should be done? And so the more that we talk and the more we connect, that was something early in my career I don't think I did nearly enough of. And that's probably why I find myself doing this podcast and really working hard to connect and reach out and continue to learn.
Yeah. I was at like a college coach camp or something, one of those recruiting combines. And I was on a court with 3 other coaches. And I think I had like beaten 2 of them in the year before, either that or shortly after. And I started asking all kinds of training questions, and I'm going, hey, you're going inside out here. What are you teaching in this? Okay, it happens, sir. And I'm asking all these questions. And one of the guy comes up to me and he's like, didn't you beat them? I was like, yeah, but I'm just interested in learning. And I got back and I tell my staff some things that they're doing at this school and what I liked. And they said, like, why are you listening to them? I said, well, it's a good experience. And they said, did they ask you any questions? And the answer was no, absolutely not. No one cared about the way I coached anything.
It goes back to the point too of like, that question is interesting because I find myself with that of like, if we win, like I go down that road of like, what aren't we doing well? Because if you win, everybody has a tendency to be like, oh, we did everything right. The culture's good. The way we run this is good. Our slide is perfect, all of that. And it's like winning almost covers up a lot, where losing exposes it really quick. And then sometimes we go the opposite way. We think everything's wrong. We lost and now we got to change everything, where maybe we're doing a lot of things right. That's what keeps me up at night as a coach. I'll tell you what. We
were super good at blocking at Ohio, and I got asked to do all these blocking presentations, and I was such a good blocking coach. And then at Marquette, we went years of just being like 6th in the league, 7th in the league. Like we'd be winning, it'd be us in Creighton, and then there's us in blocking. And we were really good at passing. And so now I get asked to do all kinds of teach us how you do the passing stuff. And,
yeah. I love it. Well, let's keep moving. I want to get to your Florida years quickly. Looking at your bio again, 2008. I just have to know who this is, and this might just be for me. It says 2008. You guys landed the #1 recruit in the country, and I'm so bad with eras. The only one I can think of is that Kelly Murphy, or who's that? Who is that? Okay, because I saw that Kelly on Murphy, there. It didn't say Kelly Murphy. Okay, and Colleen Ward was the other one. So a couple of Chicago area kids. Now, was that something you were coming from Northwestern, and those are 2 Chicago kids going out to Florida? Was that a previous connection that helped with the recruiting, or was Florida already kind of in on it and you were just kind of thrown into that? Because I would think that recruiting process was probably starting a little bit before you got there. Or take me through that a little bit, because landing a #1 recruit in the country, that's no small feat.
I got the job in, I want to say February, and Mary was like, hey, do you know this kid? Lauren Bledsoe, this middle, and I knew a First Alliance kid, the big time middle that went to Penn State. She was supposed to go to Purdue, and so I was pretty tied into what Midwest kids were doing. Murphy and Ward were a little bit later than that, but there's no doubt, when I got there, Mary loved Midwest mentality of kids and players. And
well, she's from there as well, right? Isn't she from Chicago? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And so, I just kind of stayed pretty persistent with that group and that team. The 7 evals that we were allowed to get, one of them was, I think we were like Mississippi State and Ole Miss on a Friday, Sunday, and I left our Friday night match, drove to Tulsa, Oklahoma, took a 6 a.m. flight to watch their high school games in a Chicago tournament, flew that night to where the team was Saturday night, got T-boned at an intersection and hit and ran. It was awesome. And then ended up at the hotel, and, we played our match the next day, and then we traveled home. And so I just continued to make any effort possible, knowing that those guys were legit, and they showed some early interest in Florida. And so we just kept with it. And I got Mary to go up to a practice that was pretty big in terms of the Spry world, was Mary Wise coming in the gym to watch kids. And so, I mean, again, it's 95%, Mary, and the 5%, my effort maybe helped out. But no, it was cool. It was fun to watch them. I never got to coach them, sadly. I took the head job at Ohio before I got to that, but that was a pretty cool experience. She called me at like 11 at night on, I want to say, like a Friday. And I was like, oh man, this can't be good. I answered the phone and she's like, no, you did it. You got Kelly Murphy. She just committed. And I was like, oh, cool.
And that was back in the day when they were committing pretty young. So when you say you didn't coach them, I mean, she might've been a freshman when she committed. That was when it wasn't really out of the ordinary for those younger younger recruits. So from Florida to Ohio, I don't know if I told you this, but that Ohio job that you got, I think I was actively applying for that job. I went to Ohio State, Ohio. I was trying like heck. When you're talking about not getting a call back, I didn't get a call back for that Ohio job. But again, I really think from you, one of the things that's most interesting is just administrative connections and just those relationships and all that. So again, I'm super intrigued by the assistant coach to that first head coaching job. Now, when you talk about Ohio, earlier you said I'm taking the jobs people don't want and this and that. The MAC was on fire back then. So I mean, Ohio, you were going second round within a couple of years. I mean, that's a pretty legit first head coaching job. So what was the process of that? What do you think helped you put you in a really good position going from, obviously Florida's a fantastic program. That's a top assistant job, but it's still hard to go from assistant to that first head coaching job. So how did that go down with Ohio?
Well, I mean, it's something to recognize is, I was not their first choice, second choice, third choice. I mean, really, they exhausted a lot of options before it got to me. And I can name their first, second, and third choices and people who I know that they tried to go after that said no. I think it was the Midwest ties and Big Ten experience, right? And then, Mary Wise at Florida, you had to have learned something, right? And so I was 29. One of the reasons I didn't think they wanted to hire me, and they even said after the fact, is like, does this young guy really know what he's doing? They were concerned, hey, we don't have Florida money. I said, listen, I came from Eastern Illinois. I understand we don't have an unlimited budget. But I took it guns blazing. Like, I got to meet every booster and the alumni band, and I got to meet all these people. And I probably, in some ways, was too aggressive. And always wanted to hear yeses from administrators. And if something wasn't the way I wanted, I probably didn't act the way if I had to do it over again, I probably would have been a little bit softer, nicer, understanding. Got in a couple of arguments in my first years that probably perceived me as pretty difficult. But we got through that. And, it kind of, in years 5 and 6, when things were really rolling, we inherited a kid that backed out of a good junior class, and then underclassmen that had transferred out, backed out of an NLI, so it was hard. And I just put a lot of pressure on my plate. That Jeff Carlson had made it a really, really high level program. And I didn't want to blow it.
Yeah.
And so I was probably a little difficult.
Yeah. That's refreshing to hear though. Cause I think sometimes just admitting like the pressure of like, I don't want to blow it. Like, coaches feel that, like players feel that, and we try to help them through it. And it's like, well, we get that because we get that feeling sometimes too. So yeah. Real quick on that, was that as you're getting that job, you said you weren't their first choice, second, third, they're working their way down. Again, in those situations, is that where you're directly talking to the SWA, you're emailing the AD, you're trying to get their number? Are you like, hey, Mary, can you call and check in on this?
Yeah, well, I had a couple of things going on too that probably helped as distractions. I mean, I've been involved in things where you're just like literally waiting by your phone. This was not that case. My wife was 9 months pregnant, and the Dayton job had come open as well, and I was in some communication with them. So it's kind of this fall of new baby is about to show up. I'm talking to 2 schools. Yeah. The first Ohio one was, I hadn't heard much. And then it's, hey, we want to talk to you on the phone, right? So, okay, boom, great. I got an interview. Now, what you didn't know as a first-time head coach is they probably had already talked to 7 or 8 people and gotten some no's, but maybe my name came up a couple of times. And so I get the phone interview. Mary had called. But the funniest part was the phone interview went horrible. I accidentally gave them the wrong number. And
your phone number?
Yeah. So I'm like on my cell in communication, and they call my office so I can sit on speakerphone, and I gave them the wrong office number, and they're like, hey, we tried this. And so they call my phone. We start 20 minutes late because I screwed it up. And I was kind of like, oh yeah, I don't know what would have happened there. But I was like, oh, this is all my fault.
Jeez. No, they were like, this guy feels like a head coach. Like, he may be an assistant, but he's acting like, hey, he doesn't know technology. He doesn't know his own number. Yeah. This guy's perfect. He's ready for a head coach.
He is older than 29.
Oh my God.
And then, we got through that, and I interviewed and they brought 3 on, and I knew who they were. Because it just had gotten back to me from maybe an old assistant there or something like that. And I didn't hear back. And we induced labor. And I told Jen, it doesn't sound like it's happening. All 3 interviewed. I haven't heard back in 3 days. And it turned out, I hadn't heard back in 3 days because they had offered someone that then turned it down. So they called me back, and I'm in the hospital after Jen had given birth, and they just said, "Hey, we want to bring you back on a second interview." And I said, "Okay, well, I just had a baby. I was just there. Are you bringing multiple people in for second interviews? Like, am I going to come up there and not get this job again? Because I'm pretty sure my wife will kill me." And they said, "Right now, you're the only one coming back." And so I went back, and it was that I had botched one of the answers, then the team didn't like it.
So the team, so you met with the team on that interview? I know sometimes they do that.
Yeah.
So they sat you down with the team. Yep. Oh man. So do you remember what you botched?
I botched. I said that when we're doing a sixes drill and somebody does something wrong, I don't like to stop the drill every time I want to talk to a player. I want to insert somebody for you and keep the drill moving while I talk to you and then insert you back in. And I don't know if, amongst 18 to 20-year-olds that was misconstrued on kick me out of a drill or wait, the drill's going to. And so the AD told me that I needed to work through that with the team and basically seek their approval so we can hire you. You're the one we want to hire now, but the team's got to like you or they're going to be nervous. So I met with either the team again or 3 of them and, just said, "Hey, what questions do you guys have this second time around?" And they asked, "Can you re-explain that?" And I re-explained that and they're like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." But yeah. I remember they didn't like that one.
Well, in the rearview mirror of knowing Ohio was a success, you guys crushed it there. That question, if you went back to that, I mean, was that silly or is that really important? Because I know there's been some hires where like the team's like, "I'm not so sure," like, but then the team loves them. It's like, I mean, an interview is just such a quick first impression. It could be wrong. When you look back on that, are you like, "I'm glad we did that," or was it like, was the administration, I don't want to say in the right, but were they worried too much about what the team thought? But again, it's a really strong program, so I get where they're coming from, that the team really does matter. I mean, you're coming into a successful program. I'm just curious in hindsight what you think of that, of bringing you back after you just had a kid, literally to get the team to like you.
Right. I think that when you went down the rabbit hole of involving the team in the search in multiple ways, like interviewing as a group and sitting in on the administrative roundtables, and I think part of the reason they were doing that is because they didn't want kids to transfer out. They wanted them to feel bought in. Point. They want, and so they went down that rabbit hole. And so the way they did it, I think that was the appropriate thing to do, is like, "Hey, we've kind of gone all in on team support here, so you better go get it."
That's a good point. So, well, let's keep rolling on to Marquette here. Talk to me about last season. What made that so special?
It was a totally new group. We graduated, I think the numbers were 68% of our offense and both setters. So 68% of our kill, and my entire staff was all new. So, So in January, we got together and said, "This is the roster, and I think this is what we can do. And our setter can push the tempo, and we can create a whole lot of stress." I had been to a Penn State men's practice and ultimately brought the Penn State men's assistant and learned some things they were doing at the net to create stress and pressure on opponents, and whether it's out of system or in system game, and how to coach it and how to do it. And I said, I think this roster, Penn State men, they just lost in 5 to go to the national championship, but they're small. They're one of the smaller men's teams out there, and 3 years of success in a style and system. And I thought our roster emulated that as close as it could compared to national women's teams. And I mean, we're not big at all. And we're not going to block a ton of people at all. We get touches. And like you said, you've seen improvement in blocking, but we don't block 2.5 balls a game.
Well, you talked about a brand new staff before the 2022 season, which was a super successful season, to have all those new players and all those new coaches. I know you said there were some system changes, but I'm just curious from anything else around the program that you felt like that was an opportunity to, like, the number one thing we had to get back to was this, because this is what was really helping us. We have all these new people, or this is a great opportunity to change or evolve this because we've got all new people.
I would say the second one, like, hey, we want to go down this road. I think we need to go down this road with speed of offense, with secondary style, defensively. I think we need to do this. We're all in it together. And I remember the first meeting when the staff was leaving, so season ends and we go in a room and, I said, seniors, thank you, here's your logistics. Seniors leave. Okay, guys, they're gone. Megan's got to tell you something. And it was, I'm leaving. And I went, okay, Megan, you're dismissed. And she's been 14 years. She was essentially my work wife.
Yeah.
And RJ has something to say. And, hey, I'm getting out of coaching and, you're dismissed. And so they go hang out in the hallway with the seniors and are hugging and, oh, thank you guys for sticking out my career. And I'm in front of the team. And I'm like, guys, I knew this was coming during COVID. These guys told me this was going to be their last year. I have one assistant already in place. The other one's going to be coming. But you got to understand, you were all here because I asked you to come. And you loved Megan and RJ, and I hired them. Okay, so I know in our world, you think I do absolutely nothing right? Like my wife, like you, Ryan is the dumb guy who we laugh at with his dad jokes. And I said, I get that, but just realize I've got this. Like I know what I'm doing. Trust me just a little bit, please. And they kind of smiled and laughed and said, okay, we trust you. I said, we got 2 transfers coming in. We got this, and it will come one at a time. And I will make sure we are all on the same page. So it was just really fun. And then the thing, speed of offense and hitting off hands, and that stuff's fun to learn, right? Yeah. New fun assistant comes and learn this new stuff, and 2 new players come. And it was just really, really fun. And awesome. I thought we'd be okay, but we didn't know until we rolled the ball out against Kentucky the first match.
Thanks for listening to Out of Rotation with your host, Dan Meske, presented by the American Volleyball Network. Until next time, come on, don't give them any free points. Always stay in rotation.